Mr. Mills, you probably recognize this spot if you're watching the video today. In fact, you're probably a mile away. Today's video is brought to you by Elect Bernie Sanders. Elect Bernie Sanders, come on! What else you gonna do? Elect Bernie Sanders. This is not an actual ad. Come on! Vote Bernie, feel the burn! I support Bernie Sanders and everything he does, even though I have a close relative running in the race. Alright, enough fucking around. 30 seconds, we'll get started, guys. About 15 more seconds. Y'all can stare at the Hudson Hardware and Beyond sign. Hey guys, well you can't see me at all. Holy shit. Where am I? I'm gonna turn the car around. Actually, I'm gonna start driving. We're gonna talk about replacement refrigerants. There's a lot of confusion about the refrigerants that replace R22, and we're going to ignore the argument that whether or not we are going to do it. We're just going to go straight into what's better or worse about these refrigerants. Now, anyone who hasn't lived under some sort of rock for the last several weeks knows that I use 407C. That's how I roll. But you may not roll that same way. You may use R421a, 427A, 422d, 422b, and there's probably about 30 more. Propane, whatever you want to use, you can use it. But what's the differences between these things? You know, besides propane is a shit that goes in your grill, but you can pretty much assume that it's inappropriate to put into a regular air conditioning system on account that you're going to blow your shit up. I think the flammability rating for propane is 3. And that's pretty high. Obviously, it is propane. So what's in the other refrigerants? What makes them better or worse? And how do we understand what's going on so we can pick the right one? I was talking to Mr. Billy Noth about 421a. That's what spurred me to do this blog. I was going to do a blog. I had no direction, so Billy pointed me in this direction. Thank you, Billy. 421a. Combination of R125 and R134a. Now let's think about that. Now if you were thinking about those two refrigerants being together, what other refrigerants contain 125 and 134a? Well, 407C does. 407C has both of those and R32. What else contains those? Well, we're talking about 125 and 134A. 125 is in 410A. 134A is in a lot of other refrigerants. But neither one of those refrigerants is really something that you would think that you would use mineral oil with, even though the advertisement says, hey, you can use mineral oil with 421A. In fact, if you want the same two refrigerants with a bonus refrigerant, you would then be able to call them 422b and d, because that's the same two refrigerants, 134a and 125, as 421a. The only difference between those two and 421 is the percentage of each refrigerant in the mixture, and that those two, 422a or 422b, and d, contain R600a. And that's the deciding factor right there. R600A. So now we're talking about 422B and 422D. So basically 422D is something, I think that's the bright lime green container. And then 422B is like new 22, which is what Mike likes to use. Now those have R600A, which is isobutane. Isobutane, and you're probably thinking, hey Zach, that sounds like shit that'll explode too. And you'd be right. The issue is with isobutane, they allow you a certain amount before it gets a flammability rating. What does that mean? Okay, propane has a flammability rating of 3, which means it's going to blow the hell up. That's basically what it means. Just keep it simple. If you light it, you will be riding a rocket into the sky. The other two refrigerants keep it a low enough percentage, which is between 3% and 3.4% of the total mixture, which is low enough to receive a 0 classification. So it's technically not flammable, even though you know that isobutane on its own would be quite flammable. Butane lighter, butane torch. It's obviously flammable, but when you put it in this greater mixture, it becomes non-flammable. Just like you have 410a with R125 and R32. R32 has a flammability rating of 1, meaning one of the refrigerants in 410a, 407c, both of those, R32, has a flammability rating, means it is slightly flammable. But when you combine it with 125, it loses that flammability rating because 125 dampens that effect. So, okay, that's great. Even though there's R32 machines out there in the world, 410A is not flammable. R32 does the bulk of the work in the heat transfer department because it's very good at that. And that's why 407C, which is R32, R125, and R134A. That's what 407C is. Has that R32 in there, which probably gives it a little bit lead in capacity and efficiency over those other drop-in refrigerants, or whatever you want to call drop-ins. We're referring to any refrigerant that replaces R22. You don't necessarily drop them in, which is what we're going to get to. So if R422d and B have isobutane, why is it there? The isobutane is there so you get that mineral oil, which is left in the system after you dump the R22 out of it, take it out, not dump, take it out, not put a white rag. You recover it via or per the Montreal Protocol, and you just put your 422d in. It has to get that mineral oil around. Because remember, these two refrigerants that are in 422d are the same ones that are in 407c, which we had that long discussion of how 407c is not miscible with mineral oil. But all of a sudden, we have all these other refrigerants with the same shit in them that people are saying you can flop right in there. Now, 422d and B have the isobutane to carry the oil around to a certain degree. But 421a doesn't have that. That means you have two of the ingredients in 407c, but none of the add-on, the isobutane, R600a, to carry the oil. So how does that oil get around? Or is Zach right? And 407c is the shit and no one else should use anything else? Well, of course I am. I'm just kidding. 407c, higher capacity. I choose it because the minimum of work transfers into a better overall refrigerant for a longer period of time. That's why I use it. That's one of the reasons why I want to go over this stuff, so you can see that 421a doesn't have anything to carry the mineral oil. Obviously, they believe that the mineral oil will be able to circulate enough to do the job, even though it is the same as 2 out of the 3 refrigerants that's in 407c, with nothing else added to transfer oil around. I was doing research whenever everybody was discussing 407c and our, cowboys of HVAC policy, where we've been adding POE on top of mineral, which skepticism is fine. It's like I was discussing with Billy. I said, I don't mind the back and forth. We all gain intelligence and gain information that way. Even when people say, hey man, your way is totally wrong, it's fine, because you're going to do what you believe in. It doesn't matter what other people say, as long as you believe it'll work. But you might learn something along the way. So I did some research, in the University of Purdue, I think it was running these HFC refrigerants with mineral oil. And this one particular test, which was to gauge, and these are semi-hermetic compressors, I guess, because they have oil sight glasses in them. Although I have seen some hermetics with oil sight glasses, I think these particular ones were semi-hermetic. And they were keeping an eye on the oil level after 20 minutes of runtime. The oil level after 20 minutes of runtime for R22 was the highest. 410A was the lowest. 407C retained oil in the compressor and returned it at a slower rate. So the oil level went down, but oil did come back to the compressor, just not as well as it should have. The 410A, and we're talking about reaching a steady state, meaning the oil sight glass stays in the same spot during operation. It doesn't keep decreasing and decreasing until all the oil's pumped out. The bad thing was that 410A kept decreasing and never reached a steady state. It never reached a steady state, meaning eventually all the refrigerant would leave the compressor and the compressor would fail from lack of lubrication. So they could not get a steady state with 410A, but they could with 407C. It was just much lower than R22. So we know that's bad. You had to have a certain amount of oil in the compressor. Hence, we had to add on a POE to carry oil around and to circulate back to the compressor. And that's where the idea originates from. So it's very interesting. Looking at the four refrigerants we're talking about: 407C, R125, R32, and R134A. 421A, R125, and R134A, and nothing else. And they advertise it works with all oils. Now, if it works with all oils, tell me why you can't make the jump to other HFC refrigerants that don't have isobutane added to them. It seems like 421A, for some reason, they believe it's capable of carrying the oil. Obviously, they think it'll work because they wouldn't sell it otherwise. So let's go one more step. Isobutane carrying mineral oil. What's the difference between MO99 and R407C? The same thing. The same ingredients, but with isobutane added to it. So they took the 407C to create MO99. They added the isobutane, or R600, R600A, whichever one it is. And then they say, of course, it works just fine. So MO99 is not a far cry from 407C. It just has some added refrigerant to it. I'm not quite sure the percentages. I think it's less, I want to say, like 2%, those additives. And that's sufficient to return the oil. Now think back to what we were talking about the University of Purdue. If they said during steady state the 407C cannot return quite enough oil, that's the inference. They wouldn't return enough oil, less than R22 and R410A. They add the isobutane to return enough oil to reach a sufficient steady state of oil in the compressor. Why can't we then use POE to do the same thing? That's the question. The idea is you have some critical thinking, and it's not just about reading the paper, and I know we have to read the papers and do what the people say. I agree with that. If you do something against what they say and it backfires on you, it's like a bomb blowing up in your face. But the idea with this blog, even if you never want to try it, is to think about it. What do you think about that process? What do you think about the different refrigerants and how similar they are? Now, we haven't gone into some of the other ones like 427A, 407F. Whenever you have A, B's, and C's with the refrigerants, all that means is that there's a different percentage of the ingredients in each one. Like 407C and 407F and 407A have the same ingredients, but in different percentages. Just like 422b and D. Same refrigerants, different percentages. I want to say one of them's like 60-35 and then the isobutane, and one of them's like 50-40 and the isobutane. I can't remember exactly, but it's not too far off. Hold on while I turn, gentlemen. And that's not just 407C. They've said that about, 421A, 427A, anything like that. MO99, add some POE to it to get the right oil return. Yeah, instead of playing a game, who's right, who's wrong, think about the information and come to a conclusion. Like I said, even if you're not willing to try it because you don't want to take the risk, think about what it means and what's possible. I use 407C because the POE oil adding to the mineral oil, I believe, is not going to harm the process. It has the highest capacity relative to R22. It does not have the closest pressures to R22. R421a, I believe, does. But 407c is close enough where I don't think we're going to be getting into tripping head switches or something like that because of the pressure difference. It's slightly higher, but it's not so much higher that it's going to make that big of a difference. There are people in this world who use 407c in their equipment from the factory. That's how good of a refrigerant it is. They would not do that with 422b, d, 421a, 427a. It just would not happen. Because the refrigerants don't have the capacity. When you get into look up capacity loss of drop-in refrigerants, and you'll see that after maybe, I don't know, 80, 90 degrees outside, they dive down. It's like a nosedive. Take a look at it. Anyway, guys, I'm almost at my next call. I hope you guys have a good day. Stay safe out there. If you have any comments, please put them down. Let's discuss this subject. You know, there's a lot of out there, the right, the wrong, but let's discuss it in a way that sort of we theorize about what we think it can and can't be. Like I said, even if you never want to try it, there's no harm in, you know, contemplating what you think would happen or discussing it. So that's what I hope we do. All right, guys, take a look at a nice cityscape. This is downtown Wilmington. I'm heading over to those apartments that have been the superstars on my videos for the last 4 years. Right over here on your right is where I go to traffic court, which